I've spent weeks meticulously building this guitar for a well-known musician, but it's worth nothing if it sounds awful. At this point, there is a lot of handwork that's left to do. So the first thing I'm going to tackle is getting this headstock veneer glued on and located. But before I do that, I first have to sand a little chamfer onto the end of the headstock veneer where it sits against the nut on the guitar. And I check the angle every so often just to make sure that I don't overshoot when I need to align critical items like the fretboard on a neck or the headstock veneer here on the headstock. I really like using some small dowels. It just takes all of the anxiety out of pieces slipping while you're gluing something together. And you might find yourself wondering, what kind of glue is that Mr. Mike is using here? Well, it's just regular Titebond. It's the same glue that I use for all of my furniture builds. One specific thing that I do for this glue up is I use what's called a clamping ball. Now, in this situation, it's just a 1/4-inch piece of plywood that's roughly the size of the headstock veneer. And this is really helpful to even out the clamping pressure. So if you're wondering, Mike, why are you drilling holes in the guitar now? Why didn't you do that while everything was on the CNC previously? That's a really good question, and I have a great answer for you. It's because if you remember, I was using vacuum to hold everything in place on the machine. If I drilled a hole all the way through the piece, well, I would have lost suction. I very well may have ended up with the guitar halfway across the shop. Of all the small last-minute steps you have to go through before you can say a guitar is complete, I think drilling for the jack is the most nerve-wracking. This guitar is a little bit more nerve-wracking than others just because there's so little margin on the left and right side of the jack, but thankfully I kept my cool and nailed the fit. Now, I don't think I've ever actually heard somebody say that they look forward to sanding, so if you were hoping for a motivational speech to help you get up the courage and gumption to get through it, yeah, I'm gonna let you down. But I will tell you what I do when I sand instruments. Typically, I'll start off by using a random orbit sander, but I always finish by sanding with the grain, and I go up to at least 320 grit, sometimes higher, depending on what kind of finish I'm using. I also go ahead and drill any remaining holes for hardware, like I'm doing here with the tuners, just so that way if I goof, it's way easier to repair now than after the finish has gone on. With that done, the logical next thing for me to do is to refuel with a little bit of coffee. And if you want to know what I've been drinking lately, I have it linked in the description below. Now, unless you've seen the previous videos in this series, you may not have picked up on the fact that this guitar is part of a collaboration with Carhartt. And the cool part about that is that they ended up giving it to Metallica to say thank you for a collaboration that they did together. So in keeping with that theme, this guitar is going to one of the most iconic rock bands of all time. Finishing it in at least some shade of black was the only logical conclusion for this instrument. So I used a pre-color stain by Rubio to make the neck jet black, and then I sanded it back a little bit to feather it out. For the actual finish on the neck and body of the instrument, I went with Rubio Monocoat in the color black. And what I love about this finish is just how fast and easy it is to apply. But what's even better is the finished look. I love the subtle matte sheen of this finish and the texture of the wood. It actually feels soft to the touch. So you may be noticing a little bit more black in this instrument there in the pickup cavities and the electronics cavity. And no, that's not just in keeping with the heavy metal theme, that's actually shielding paint. The reason that's important is so that the electronics from the guitar don't actually pick up interference from things like your cell phone or a TV or radio. Wiring up the electronics on an instrument is a great time to turn on some classic rock, brew an extra pot of coffee, and just enjoy the process. And I gotta give a quick shout out to my friends over at Stu Mac because they are extending a 10% discount off of all the hardware and components that I used in this instrument. But you've gotta act quick because this discount is only available for the next 2 weeks. And there's gonna be a link in the description below where you can go and check it out. Anytime a project gets close to being completed, it just gets so exciting, and even more so for a guitar, because you spent all this time picking out the different components, these boutique pickups that everybody's been talking about from bare knuckle pickups, and you just have all these questions that start to come to your mind, like what's the tone going to be? How easy is this thing going to be to play? What's the sustain going to be like? And ultimately, is the client going to love it as much as you do? I've got something really cool to show you in just a minute, but first, a little surprise. The background music you've been hearing throughout this video, well, it was actually played on this guitar. I connected with a local musician, Raymond Hemms, to take this guitar through its paces and record a small demo.